General Hospital for 12 long years, facing everything medicine could throw at me: accidents, heart failures, overdoses, gunshot wounds, and the endless parade of trauma that humanity inflicted upon itself. Yet nothing could have prepared me for the case that ended my career. It was a suffocating evening. The emergency ward overflowed with patients, and fatigue weighed heavily on me. I had been on duty since morning, with no rest, no pause, no chance to breathe. Just as I thought I could slip away for a few hours of sleep, a nurse came running, her voice trembling. "Dr. Scott." Another patient. Critical. Reluctantly, I followed. On the gurney lay a man, unconscious, his skin pale, his body twitching violently. He had been found on the beach, barely alive, struggling against the suffocating grip of a severe allergic shock that had nearly crushed his lungs. As I examined him, I knew the truth: this man was already lost. His blood work was a disaster, his organs failing, his life slipping through my fingers. I did everything protocol demanded: stabilized, scanned, monitored, but deep down, I had abandoned hope. I left the ward that night, convinced he would not survive until morning. But I was wrong. I reached home late that night, exhausted to the bone. My body craved sleep, but my mind replayed the pale, twitching face of the patient I had left behind. His condition had been beyond repair. I had seen too many like him cases, where science had no answers, only silence. I collapsed onto my bed, convincing myself I had done all I could. Soon, sleep dragged me into its heavy embrace. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the darkness. I fumbled for it, half asleep. On the other end, the trembling voice of a nurse shattered the silence. "Dr. Scott, he's gone." The patient, he didn't make it. I sat upright, not surprised. I expected that, I muttered. His body was failing. No one could have saved him. There was a pause. Then she added, almost whispering, "We couldn't find any identification. No documents, no family, no name. He's a ghost." Her words unsettled me. A man with no identity, dying nameless in my ward. I tried to shake it off. Death was routine. Anonymous patients arrived and departed all the time. Still, a strange unease clung to me. I didn't know then that this call was only the beginning. Following morning, I walked back into Hampshire General Hospital with a dull acceptance of routine. I expected silence about the nameless man, a body transferred to the morgue, a file closed, another case forgotten. But when I entered the ward, I froze. The staff had gathered in a silent circle, their faces pale, their whispers frantic. I pushed through, my heart tightening. And there, sitting upright on the very bed where I had left a lifeless body, was the patient. Alive, awake, breathing. His skin, once ghostly pale, now seemed healthy. His chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. His eye sharp, intelligent, followed every movement in the room. It was impossible. He had been declared dead only hours before. I stumbled closer, checking his vitals. Perfect. Strong heartbeat, clean lungs, no trace of the allergic collapse that had nearly ended him. Even stranger, his blood tests and scans showed nothing. No illness, no damage. Not even the chronic conditions recorded in his earlier reports. It was as if his body had been remade. The nurses stood trembling. Some whispered prayers, others backed away, refusing to meet his gaze. For the first time in my career, I felt fear in the presence of a patient. I stood frozen, unable to tear my gaze from him. The man who had been declared dead was now watching me with an intensity that burned into my chest. His eyes didn't wander like those of a confused survivor. They locked onto mine, unblinking, almost knowing. "Who are you?" I asked softly. Silence. He tilted his head, studying me like a predator, measuring its prey. There was no fear in him, no gratitude, no desperation, only awareness. The nurses shifted nervously behind me. One whispered, "Doctor, he understands everything we say, but he refuses to speak." I tried again, more firmly. "Tell me your name. Where are you from?" Nothing. The silence was worse than any scream. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. It chilled me more than any wound or deathbed I had ever seen. I ordered more tests. Blood, scans, neurological exams. Each result came back flawless. Not a trace of illness remained. A perfect human specimen. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were the ones under examination. Not him. That night, I wrote in my notes, "Patient alive. Condition impossible. Eyes suggest knowledge beyond human explanation." Didn't know how true those words would become. By evening, The hospital had become a hive of rumors. Staff whispered in corridors, avoiding eye contact whenever the patient's name, more lack of it, was mentioned. Some claimed they had seen his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Others swore they heard him whispering when no one was near his bed. I dismissed it as paranoia. Hospitals breed fear easily, and superstition thrives where science fails. Yet, when I passed by his room at midnight, I froze. The ward was silent, but I could hear something faint, like a voice pressed between walls. A whisper, low and rhythmic. I leaned closer. The sound was unmistakable. He was speaking. But when I entered, he lay there still, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. No movement, no lips parted. Only those haunting eyes meeting mine, as though he knew I had been listening. "Are you praying?" I asked. My throat dried out again. Silence. But the monitors flickered. Not just his, the lights above his bed dimmed, blinked, then steadied again. Machines don't play tricks. Something was wrong. The nurse on duty refused to enter his room afterward. "Doctor," she whispered, trembling, "he isn't one of us." For the first time, I wondered if she was right. Sleep was impossible. I stayed in the hospital overnight, my mind gnawed by unease. Around 3 a.m., I forced myself back into his ward, determined to prove at least to myself that he was nothing more than a patient who had defied the odds. He sat upright this time, waiting. The moment I entered, his gaze locked onto mine again. No words, no expression, just those sharp, unblinking eyes. I tried to sound calm. "You survived the impossible. You should be dead. I need answers. Who are you?" Minutes dragged like hours. My pulse hammered in my ears. And then, finally, his lips moved. "I was never dead." The voice was low, gravelly, and yet clear. Each word carried weight, like an echo from somewhere far older than the man before me. My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He didn't respond. Instead, he leaned forward slowly, deliberately, until his face was inches from mine. His eyes widened, as if daring me to look away. "Doctor," he whispered, "you saw me fall, but you don't understand what rose." The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath clouded in front of me, and then, just as suddenly, he lay back down, closing his eyes. Silent again. But I knew I had heard him by morning. The hospital was restless. Whispers traveled faster than medicine. Nurses swore the temperature around his bed kept dropping at night. One orderly refused to go near him, claiming he saw shadows move against the walls when the patient opened his eyes. I wanted to dismiss it all as stress, mass hysteria, but doubt gnawed at me. I had heard him speak. I had felt the cold. Science had no chart for what I had witnessed. During rounds, I checked his vitals again. Every reading was perfect. Too perfect. It was as if his body had been reset, erased of weakness. Yet his silence, his refusal to give us anything of his past, turned him into something more unsettling than any illness I had ever faced. The hospital board grew concerned. They wanted answers, identity, medical explanation, a path forward. I had none. All I could say was that he had died, and then he hadn't. Later that day, a young nurse approached me, pale and trembling. "Doctor," she whispered, "I swear I saw him standing by my station last night. But when I looked again, he was back in his bed." Her voice broke. "I think he's playing with us." I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, but I couldn't. The board decided to keep him under strict observation. 2 nurses were assigned to stay outside his room at all times. Cameras were installed. Every movement monitored. Yet nothing eased. That night, when I returned for another late shift, panic had already erupted. The nurses stood pale and trembling, pointing toward his room. "He's gone," one whispered. I rushed inside. The bed was empty, sheets cold, no trace of him. Immediately, footage showed him lying still one moment, and then static. Just 10 seconds of flickering white noise. When the video cleared, the bed was empty. No door opened. No one entered. He had simply ceased to exist. Within that frame of time, security tore through the hospital, searching every floor, every stairwell, every exit. Nothing. Hours later, as the chaos settled, I sat in the ward staring at the empty bed. My mind was heavy with exhaustion, but something urged me to keep watching. And then I blinked, just once. When my eyes opened, he was there, sitting on the bed again, awake, watching me. The nurses screamed. One fainted, but he never moved. He just whispered, "Doctor, you shouldn't leave me alone." After his sudden reappearance, the hospital was never the same. Staff whispered of curses, of evil spirits. of things medicine could not fight. A few refused to work their shifts. One nurse resigned on the spot, muttering, "He's not a man, he's something else." I tried to hold the ward together, but fear spread like disease. Patients began reporting strange phenomena, objects moving at night, whispers through the vents, the feeling of being watched even when alone, and always. The nameless man sat silently on his bed, watching, waiting. One evening, I found another note slipped under my office door. No name, no signature, just a single line scrawled in trembling handwriting. His shadow was walking the halls without him. I dismissed it as hysteria, until later that night, when a cleaner swore she saw his figure moving in the corridor, while the man himself remained inside his locked room. I confronted him directly, anger masking my fear. "What are you?" I demanded. For the first time, he smiled. It wasn't warmth, it was something hollow, stretching across his face unnaturally. And then, in that same cold voice, he whispered, "I am what comes after." Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing at the foot of my bed, watching, silent. His eyes were the same in dreams as in waking life, endless, inescapable. One night, I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. My apartment was silent, but I knew I wasn't alone. The air felt heavier, colder, and then, from the corner of the room, a whisper, "Doctor." I spun around. Nothing. Shadows clung to the walls, stretching longer than they should have. I tried to rationalize it: exhaustion, stress, the human mind inventing phantoms, but the fear refused to leave. By morning, my hands trembled so badly I could hardly hold a pen. When I returned to the hospital, he was waiting for me, sitting on the bed, staring as if he knew exactly where I had been. "You're in my dreams," I blurted before I could stop myself. His expression didn't change, but his lips moved just enough for me to read the words, though no sound came. "No, doctor, you're in mine." The ground beneath me seemed to vanish. For the first time in my career, I wanted to run, not from a dying patient, but from one who refused to die. By the end of the week, the hospital was collapsing into chaos. Patients who had never met him began reporting the same nightmares, visions of a dark ocean, endless and cold, with a figure standing on the shore watching them. Nurses whispered that whenever they walked past his room, they could hear faint breathing behind them, though no one was there. The board demanded I explain. "Is it mass hysteria, Dr. Scott? Some contagious psychosis?" I couldn't answer. There was no medical precedent for what was happening. That night, alarms blared. A heart monitor spiked in another ward. By the time I arrived, the patient inside was screaming, eyes wide, face pale as though suffocating. He kept repeating the same words. "He was here. He touched me. He won't leave." But the nameless man never left his bed. I checked the cameras. He hadn't moved an inch. And yet, when I leaned over the screaming patient, I noticed something that froze my blood. A handprint burned into the man's chest. Dark, blistered skin, as though pressed by something not entirely human. When I rushed back to the ward to confront him, he was sitting upright, waiting, his hand resting on his chest in the exact same shape. And he smiled. By the following night, Hampshire General no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like a haunted vessel drifting into madness. Staff began quitting in groups, refusing to work under the same roof as him. Families demanded to remove their loved ones, terrified by whispers of a cursed patient. Security patrols doubled, but none dared to step too close to his ward. And still he sat there, calm, silent, watching. One nurse, hysterical, swore she saw him standing at the far end of the hallway, even though his room was locked. Another claimed she found her reflection in a window only. It wasn't hers. It was his. The board called me in for an emergency meeting. They wanted him transferred, removed from Hampshire General entirely. I argued against it, not because I believed we could contain him, but because I knew moving him wouldn't change anything. This wasn't a man we could control. It was something else wearing a man's skin. That evening, as I made one last check of the ward, the alarms wailed again. Lights flickered violently, plunging us into strobing darkness. When the power returned, patients from 3 different rooms were gone, beds empty, monitors silent. And in the middle of the hall, he stood barefoot, his head tilted, whispering words no one could understand. Panic exploded through the hospital. Families screamed. Staff rushed to check every ward, but the missing patients were nowhere to be found. No one had seen them leave. No alarms had triggered. They had simply ceased to exist, and still, the nameless man stood there, motionless in the hallway. When security advanced on him, their radios crackled into static. Cameras cut to black. One officer raised his hand to shove him back toward. His room then froze. Eyes wide, body rigid. His mouth opened in a silent scream before he collapsed. Dead. That the others dragged his body away, refusing to go near the patient again. I demanded answers. Where are the missing patients? What did you do? At last, he spoke again, his voice calm, steady, and wrong in a way that made the skin on my arms crawl. They are where I was, waiting. In the dark between. I shuddered. Between what? He only smiled. That night, I stayed in my office, but sleep crept over me despite the fear. I dreamed of an endless corridor, white walls stretching forever, and at the end of it, I saw the missing patients, standing silent, their eyes black. Behind them, he was waiting. The disappearances forced the hospital to shut its doors. Police swarmed Hampshire General, questioning every staff member, demanding access to footage. But the security recordings were useless. Blank static filled the exact moments when patients vanished. I tried to explain what we had witnessed, but the detectives looked at me with thinly veiled disbelief. Doctor, people don't just disappear, one officer insisted. But they did. I had seen it. That night, police stationed themselves outside his room. 4 officers, armed and alert. I almost felt relief, believing authority might succeed where medicine had failed. Then, just after midnight, the screams began. By the time we reached the ward, 2 officers were gone. Simply gone. Their weapons and radios lay scattered on the floor. The other 2 sat trembling in the corner, unable to speak. The patient stood calmly by the window, looking out into the night. When he turned toward us, his voice carried across the ward. Smooth and deliberate. You cannot guard against what is already inside. The surviving officers fled the hospital, refusing to return. And I realized something terrifying. This wasn't containment anymore. Whatever he was, it had begun to spread beyond the walls of Hampshire General. News of Hampshire General's mystery patient spread like wildfire. Reporters crowded the gates, hungry for answers. Rumors twisted the truth. Some said he was an experiment. Others claimed he was a ghost revived from the dead. But then, something darker began to ripple through the town. People who had never set foot in the hospital came forward, pale and trembling. They described seeing him standing at the edge of their streets at night, watching from alleys, reflected in darkened windows. Always silent, always near. One mother swore she saw him standing over her child's crib, though the house was locked. Another man drove off the road claiming the patient appeared in the middle of the street. The police dismissed it all as hysteria. I wanted to believe that, too. But I knew better. One evening, as I left the hospital, I felt it myself. The streets were empty. Yet when I glanced into a shop window, I saw his reflection standing directly behind me. But when I turned, no one was there. That night, the town slept uneasy. Because it wasn't just the hospital anymore. He had stepped into their world. And he wasn't leaving. Within days, the town surrounding Hampshire General was gripped by fear. Shops closed early, streets emptied after dusk. People whispered of sightings, figures standing in fields, on rooftops, at the end of long corridors. Of night, the police tried to calm the panic, but even they were shaken. 2 officers who had returned to investigate went missing without a trace. Their cars were found idling, doors open, radios hissing with static. At the hospital, staff had dwindled to only the desperate few who hadn't fled. Patients refused to stay, dragging for poles as they left with families. The wards were barren, echoing like tombs. And still, he remained, always waiting. That night, I dared to confront him again. My voice shook, but I demanded answers. What are you doing to them? Why are people disappearing? He tilted his head, those eyes drilling into me. Then, in that voice that seemed older than language itself, he said, "They are not gone. They are mine." I felt the air collapse around me, my chest heavy, my lungs straining. For a moment, I thought I would vanish too. But then, just as suddenly, the pressure lifted. He lay back, closing his eyes. And I realized something terrifying. He was only waiting to choose who was next. The town no longer felt alive. Streets emptied, shops abandoned, windows shuttered. By night, you could hear doors slam and whispers crawl through the silence, though no one dared to look outside. Reports flooded in of entire families gone. Neighbors would wake to find houses locked, meals half-eaten, beds still warm, but no trace of the people who had slept in them. Always the same story. No sound, no struggle. Just absence. And every time someone claimed they had seen him nearby, the hospital board finally closed, Hampshire General. But closing the doors meant nothing. He was no longer confined to us. I walked the halls one last time, their emptiness pressing against me like a coffin. His room, the room that had been his, was silent, empty, the bed neatly made. He had left, of his own accord. As I stood there, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. Turning, I saw him standing at the far end of the corridor. No restraints, no staff, just him. And then he spoke, his voice echoing through the hollow hospital. "Doctor, it's time you understand. I didn't come here to be healed. I came here to open the way." The lights above me shattered, plunging the corridor into darkness. And I finally realized we hadn't lost control of him. We had never had it. The hospital shook as though an earthquake had struck, yet nothing outside moved. Only inside the walls groaned, windows rattled, and ceiling tiles rained down like ash. And at the center of it all, he stood, calm, unmoved, that the air thickened, pulling at me, tugging at the very marrow of my bones. I staggered, clutching the wall as the corridor seemed to stretch, warping into something endless. The doors of the wards banged open, slamming against the walls. For a split second, I swore I saw them, the missing patients standing in the rooms, eyes black, their bodies still, their mouths opening in silent screams. He raised his hand, not toward them, toward me. "Do you feel it, Doctor?" he said, voice resonating like 1,000 echoes layered into one. "The place between. The door is opening." And then, the floor split, not physically, but in my vision, as if reality itself had cracked. Through the gap, I glimpsed something vast and endless, a black ocean beneath a starless sky. Shapes writhed beneath the surface, stretching, clawing upward. I tore my gaze away, my stomach heaving, but I could still hear them. Countless voices rising from that abyss, whispering my name. He stepped closer, his smile finally reaching his eyes. "You were the one who kept me alive, so you will be the first to follow." The air collapsed around me, crushing, pulling. My body felt weightless, yet impossibly heavy, as though something had hooked itself into my chest and was dragging me forward. I tried to resist, clinging to the wall, but the corridor stretched like liquid, bending into impossible angles. The lights above flickered, sputtered, then went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in Hampshire General. I stood on the edge of that same endless ocean I had seen in my visions. Black water stretched into infinity, silent waves lapping against a shore of ash. The sky above was empty, no stars, no moon, just a void pressing down on me. Behind me, I heard footsteps, slow, familiar. He was there, the nameless patient, walking across the shore, barefoot, leaving no prints in the sand, and with him hundreds of others, the missing patients, the lost officers, families from the town. They all stood in rows behind him, eyes black, faces empty, bodies unmoving. "You see now, Doctor," he said softly, his voice carrying across the void. "There was never a cure, only a passage." I fell to my knees, the weight of it crushing me. And then he leaned close, whispering, "You opened the way for me. Now it remains open. For all of them." The ocean roared, and the ground beneath me split. I was falling. I don't remember hitting the ground. Perhaps I never did. Perhaps I am still falling. But when I awoke, I was back in Hampshire General, lying on the cold floor of the empty corridor. My hands shook, my body drenched in sweat. But I was alive. Or so I thought. The hospital was silent. Too silent. Rooms that should have been filled with chaos stood empty. Beds stripped bare. The wards, the waiting rooms, the cafeteria are deserted. Not a single patient. Not a single nurse. Not a single sound. Except one. Footsteps. I turned the corner, and there he was, the nameless man, standing where it had all begun, in the very bed where we first tried to save him. His eyes locked onto mine, but this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, shadows moved. Hundreds of them. The missing. The taken. Their faces blank. Their bodies still, watching me, waiting. I staggered back, my throat closing, the truth burning into me. The hospital hadn't survived. The town hadn't survived. The world would not survive. Because he was no longer a patient. He was a doorway, and I was the one who had let him through.